Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jen Hicks. I'm the Director of Communications and Outreach with Maine Woodland Owners, a nonprofit organization based in Augusta, Maine, where we serve the woodland owners of Maine with resources, advice, and a monthly newsletter. We have a membership program that we encourage everybody to be part of, and you can find a lot of resources on our website. And we are the voice of woodland owners in the legislature. So we're very glad to have people here today to hear the program with one of our resource people. This is Chad Hammer. He is the invasive plants biologist with the Maine Natural Areas Program. And he is who we go to hear more about the latest information around invasive plants, managing invasive plants, and the programs that are being implemented to help slow the spread of invasive plants in the state of Maine. So today we have Chad's presentation about all the things that they're doing in their department, but also the ways that you as woodland owners can be proactive in managing your invasive plants. In fact, it's one of the most important services that woodland owners can provide, since this is a very fast-growing issue, and most of our land in Maine is privately owned. So the more that woodland owners know, the better. And so that's the goal of today's program, is to increase your knowledge, to inspire you and get you excited for the spring when we start seeing some of these plants showing up. We also hope to have an in-person program as kind of a companion to this later in the year. So if you're on our email list or you're a member, you get our newsletter, you'll find out when we're going to host the in-person portion of this program. But until then, you have today, and this is being recorded, so it will be available to review. For those who weren't able to make it, they will be able to watch this program at a time when they're available. We ask that you hold off on your questions until near the end of the program, because this is jam-packed with lots of information, and we want to get this, we want to get as close to an hour as possible, not go over too long. But Chad has offered to stay as long as needed to answer all the questions after the program, after his presentation. If you have questions as we go along, go ahead and send it in the chat. So if you've arrived and you haven't opened your chat box, I encourage you to do that and just type in your questions, and he may jump to answering them during the presentation if it makes sense, or wait to answer them at the end. In the meantime, everybody should be muted just to make sure we have good audio quality. I love seeing the faces of the people who've turned their videos on, so you're welcome to do that, but you don't have to. And without any further ado, Chad, your mic is yours. Thank you very much for doing this for us.
Awesome. Thanks, Jen. Can everybody hear me okay?
Yep, I hear you well. Everybody hear you? Okay.
All right. Well, yeah, like Jen said, my name is Chad Hammer. I'm the invasive plant biologist with the Maine Natural Areas Program. We're within the Department of Agriculture, Conservation, and Forestry. I got a lot to talk to you about today. We're going to be talking about a lot of different things about invasive plant invasion, ecology, spread, their impacts, a little bit about early detection, rapid response, how to prioritize management. It also planned some common invasive plants and woodland identification. Before we get going, I would like to just kind of introduce the Maine Natural Areas Program, if you're not familiar with that. We help facilitate the conservation of Maine's biodiversity. And we do that by collecting and tracking data, and then providing and sharing this data with many different landowners, developers, resource managers, different towns, state agencies, and various conservation partners throughout the state. And we also do a lot of invasive plant initiatives as well, as that's a high risk to biodiversity. Just some of the data that we collect are on at-risk species, exemplary natural communities, and exemplary ecosystems in the state. Wildlife habitat, ecological reserves, so monitoring of ecological reserves, and then also invasive plants. Just a kind of deeper dive into our invasive plant work. Primarily, this is kind of my role, and it's really to prevent early detection and rapid response species from becoming widespread in the state of Maine. So every couple of years, we have a new a few new invasive plants in the state. So really trying to manage them and eradicate them and not enabling them to become widespread in the state. And then I also do focus on widespread invasives that threaten biodiversity, so kind of are threatening those rare habitats and ecosystems in the state. I collect a lot of data, so surveying, mapping, and monitoring early detection rapid response species, and also identifying, confirming invasive plant records throughout the state, mostly through IMAP invasives and kind of monitoring trends and distribution of plants throughout Maine. Producing a lot of management plans, so on those kind of rare ecosystems and for those early detection rapid response species, producing a lot of management plans for landowners and different organizations. And also we do a lot of treatment. So I'm a master herbicide applicator. So I do a lot of treatment myself, whether that's chemical or a lot of mechanical and manual treatments with teams of interns throughout the summer. And we also do a lot of education outreach. So events like this and throughout the field season, doing a lot of invasive plant workshops. All right, so let's get into it. What is an invasive species? Well, according to the federal government, an invasive species is when a non-native species colonizes, and that colonization can lead to large measurable impacts on the landscape. So whether that's it could be either one of these three or all three: economic harm, environmental harm, or harm to human health, and therefore that is a non-native invasive species. In the state of Maine here, it's very similar definition, but we put a lot of emphasis on what is bold there, which can establish and spread in minimally managed habitats. So since we have a lot of forest and wetlands, we don't technically consider something invasive unless it can actually jump to, so make large spatial jumps to these minimally managed habitats and able to establish and spread in them. Yeah, so that, and I just want to kind of note here, it's also important to note that an invasive species is a non-native species. So a lot of native species may be weedy or aggressive, or I like to call them, they have invasive tendencies, maybe like a Virginia creeper or sumac. But these are not invasive plants. These are native plants, and by definition, invasive plants are non-native. But the good news is that most non-native species are not invasive. So just kind of a quick rule of thumb. This is kind of from an old paper. It's also for all taxa of organisms, but roughly out of every 100 non-native species that ends up here in North America, only about 1% of them can actually establish and quickly spread. So about 1% of the species that come here have the potential to become invasive. So why are invasive plants so successful? Well, they're highly competitive. And this is not only above ground, but also below ground, their root systems. For example, Japanese knotweed, more than half of the biomass is actually below ground, which is kind of hard to believe because they grow so dense and thick. But there's more biomass actually below ground when you see a patch of Japanese knotweed. But this aggressive growth allows them to form very dense monocultures. And they also have something called extended leaf phenology, kind of in their genetic makeup, which enables them to leaf out really early in the growing season and also hold their leaves very late in the growing season. And we'll talk a little about that more later. But there's also this theory of an enemy release hypothesis. So these plants are able to put a lot more resources into being highly competitive and above ground growth because they do not have the need to produce different types of compounds for defense. And they're also not getting cut back by herbivores nearly as much as our natives because the natives don't graze on them or eat them. Insects don't eat them. A lot of our deer and our ungulates and our mammals avoid them. So they don't have to produce compounds for defense, and they can just put all of their resources into growing aggressively. They don't necessarily have to worry about regrowing too often. They're also able to provide to conduct habitat alteration, so really changing their ecosystem to benefit themselves and also negatively impact surrounding neighboring plants. This is typically through allelopathy. So this is done by a lot of these plants can either, whether it's decomposing of their leaf material or volatile organic compounds are released from their roots, changing the soil chemistry and also making that soil toxic for neighboring plants, which may not necessarily kill them, but it can definitely reduce their vigor. And it can also, a big thing in forests are that these allelopathic chemicals actually will kill mycorrhizal, arbuscular mycorrhizal fungi networks, which are really needed for tree saplings to regenerate. So a lot of our trees depend on mycorrhizal fungi, but these chemicals actually will kill those fungal networks. So really suppressing tree regeneration. They also are really abundant at reproduction, so they're high fecundity rates. They produce a ton of seeds, and typically speaking, the seeds have a high viability rate. So just producing a lot of offspring and better resource use. Just a little bit about extended leaf phenology. So this is a great time to get out there and survey. This is a forest stand in Augusta, just totally taken over by shrubby honeysuckle. Very early in the spring, you can see all the native plants are still dormant. So this is a great time to get out there and survey and flag invasive plants and even cut them. In the case of honeysuckle, even if you can't really deal with it fully, even if you just cut the above ground biomass and let it resprout, you're at least getting rid of that mature above ground growth that will produce flowers and fruits and reproduce. Where if you cut the above ground biomass, a lot of times you're reducing its ability to produce seed. All right, and these plants damage and kill our native plants directly and indirectly. So kind of on the top pictures there, we have knotweed on the left and garlic mustard on the right. Those are two plants that are highly allelopathic and will just kill everything growing underneath them. That's more of an indirect kill, or these plants can directly kill our native plants by, in the case of bittersweet, strangling and girdling. How do these plants get here? So a lot of it, unfortunately, is deliberate. Up to 60% of these plants have deliberately been delivered here for horticulture reasons. Also, livestock in the late 1800s, early 1900s, a lot of these plants were brought here because they're highly productive for livestock feed and fodder, forage. We in the mid 1900s, we brought a lot of these plants here. We thought was for conservation. So, for example, honeysuckle was widely planted in autumn olive for the berry production, but we later found out that the berries weren't nearly as nutritious. So that was a bad idea, and also accidental. So livestock. Shipping, things like that. And once they're here, how do they spread? So once these plants are in North America, they mostly spread by seed and fragments, plant fragments known as propagules. And this can often be prevented as it's mostly through human activity. So just a lot of different pathways here. Not so much human caused, but I guess in the case of climate change, maybe, but a lot of natural disturbances, so flooding, basically moving a lot of these plant propagules downstream, and also creating bare mineral soil on the banks that they can thrive, opening up niche space. Horticulture, recreation, so any types of muddy tires, muddy boots. That's why it's important to clean your equipment often. In the case of timber harvest, it's really important to even get the cleaning of the machinery right into the contract, to make those contractors make sure that they're cleaning their equipment before they come on site, and even after they leave site as well. Also hay, fill, any type of earth moving activities, so bringing in fill or moving soil, wildlife, and again, culvert construction, kind of have a couple different things going on there. You have heavy machinery coming in, water moving, so a couple different pathways with culverts. And these are just all really important to be aware of because a lot of the game here with invasive plants is monitoring. So monitoring and early detection and rapid response. I kind of focused a lot on disturbance with this here because I like to kind of talk about disturbance with anybody that has working woodlots and causing any type of disturbance in their forests, as that's how these plants can invade forests. So Just a little about disturbance and invasion dynamics. It often takes development and modifications or different land use like agriculture, forest management, or any type of disturbance to introduce invasive plants to a new area or open area. And depending on how close this open area is to an existing seed source, these populations can get out of hand really quickly. So just want to make the point that it's really important to know where your seed sources of invasive plants are, especially if you plan on doing any type of timber harvesting activities. It's really good to know how close there is an invasive plant seed source or how far. If it's really far, then you have a little bit more leeway in your management activities. And then these plants are further spread throughout the landscape by the same kind of natural processes, development modifications, land use, and disturbance events. Just a little bit more about disturbance and ecological barriers. All plants, native and non-native, really need to overcome ecological barriers to be able to establish in a new area. So these barriers can be biological, such as, are they good dispersers or bad dispersers? Are they good competitors? Are there physical barriers in their way, such as mountains or a dense forest, maybe a mall or a large housing development, or environmental barriers, such as low light levels? That would be a barrier, or maybe just no exposed soil. But the role of disturbance really breaks down all of these barriers. It can really break down all of them, depending on which one you look at. And not only does it break down barriers, but it also brings invasive plant propagules to the new site, which ultimately this is what enables invasive plants to invade new areas, and especially forests. And these disturbances can be natural or anthropogenic, human caused. So this is just kind of an example of that, something that I've been thinking a lot about lately, that really exacerbates the role of disturbance. Is invasive plants and canopy disturbances. So when you have timber harvesting activities and also forest pests and disease, these forests are really at risk for invasion. So I know there's kind of a lot of words here, but we'll just kind of go over real piece by piece. But ultimately, kind of those kind of cartoonish pictograms I just went over really kind of tell the story of that invasive plants really need an open area and available niche space to become established, and also a nearby seed source. While canopy gaps are not uncommon in forested ecosystems, they're becoming more frequent with warming temperatures and novel threats. So forest pests and disease like beech bark disease, beech leaf disease, hemlock woolly adelgid, they've all significantly degraded tree foliage, tree mortality, therefore increasing the amount of light that reaches the forest floor. These large and frequent canopy breaks can lead to significant lasting changes in forest structure, canopy closure and species composition, and also allowing invasive species to thrive. And also trees that are impacted by a lot of these pests and disease are more vulnerable to other stressors such as drought, extreme weather, and therefore increasing blowdown events. So kind of exacerbating this disturbance in the canopy gaps, allowing for more pathways for invasive plants to come in, and also soil disturbances. And then also the big thing here too is that you don't necessarily have to have a close proximity to a seed source, as birds often will bring they'll eat a lot of seeds and berries on the forest edges, and then roost in forests at night. So their droppings contain these seeds that are viable in the case of multiflora rose up to 20 years in that soil. They're just kind of waiting for the perfect conditions to germinate. And if you open up the canopy above them, they're gonna get those environmental signals that it's okay to basically sprout. So just kind of making a point that with any disturbance, it's very important to monitor often, and kind of know how to identify these plants and find them early and respond rapidly. All right, and this was just an example I found in Augusta last year. I thought this was actually I'm sorry, it was in Bath. I thought this was really interesting, just kind of making the point to be really cautious whenever you have fill brought in or any type of culvert constructions or road work done. Really know where your sources are coming from. This was a pile of fill that, as you maybe can identify, that's all knotweed growing on that fill and also down sloped from that fill pile. And I was really curious what kind of happened first here. Did the fill get dropped off and the knotweed present on the bank and then basically spread onto the bare exposed soil of the fill? Or did the fill have knotweed propagules that then spread downhill? So kind of which way was this going? How did the invasion kind of happen? And actually, when I visited that site a couple months later, when I drove by it again, I was really surprised to find out it's actually two different species of knotweed. The stuff that's on that fill pile is actually giant knotweed. And then downslope is Japanese knotweed. So they're totally different species. Giant knotweed is basically Japanese knotweed on steroids. It gets about 18 feet tall, and the leaves are 5 times the size. And you can see me standing there with a piece of the Japanese and a piece of the giant. And that was early summer, and that giant knotweed continued to grow about another 5 feet taller. So it got about 17, 18 feet tall. So this was just an example of why to be really careful about fill. And why do we care about all this? And for me, it always comes down to this quote: "If you tug on anything in nature, you find it connected to everything else," by John Muir. And typically speaking, with native invasive plants, when they occupy a site, they will displace our native plants and outcompete our native plants. And this results in them being displaced. It also results in a reduction of native seed sources, a reduction of regeneration, a loss of important trees, loss of functional diversity because they form these very dense monocultures, and also a reduction of biomass and biodiversity. This can lead to changes to forest structure, organic inputs into our ecosystems, reduction of biodiversity, and in the case of when these plants are growing along water, we can also see increases in water temperature because they're poor at their shading ability is compromised. And this leads to an impairment of ecosystem service benefits. So reductions of carbon sequestration is very common, loss of critical wildlife habitat, poor water filtration abilities, and these plants just don't hold our banks together nearly as good as our natives. So poor bank stabilization, poor erosion control, and flood protection. Just some impacts to local wildlife. The big thing here is that insects are highly specialized creatures with native plants. Kind of like I mentioned earlier, most insects do not. You'd be hard pressed to find an insect eating plant material of an invasive plant, and that is really important. So our native insects have co-evolved for millions of years with our native plants. So many native insects not only feed, but also develop and reproduce on one plant species or a closely related group of plants. So they share the same evolutionary history. And this is just an extreme example of some very specialized plants and insect interactions. So the Luna moth only feeds on sycamore, sumac, pecan, walnut, and that's about it. Monarch butterflies, as you probably know, are highly specialized with milkweeds, and then we have some endangered pollinators like the rusty-patched bumblebee, which is highly specialized for one or two types of wildflowers. As invasive plants are pushing out these natives and a lot of our wildflowers and a lot of these plants that these insects have evolved with, we're losing the insects as well. So this is just kind of an understory of Japanese silkgrass invading an understory. And again, with the monarch butterfly, that is a black swallowwort there. It's actually in the same family as milkweed. So the monarch is actually tricked into thinking it can use swallowwort as a host plant. So it'll actually lay its eggs on the swallowwort, which is really common along the coast of Maine. And then the larva will feed on the leaf material, and it's actually toxic to them. So swallowwort is now becoming a sink for the already threatened monarch butterfly populations. All right, and it's not only the insects that are impacted by this, but this is just a pictogram of kind of what happens to those insects. So here we have, if we start on the laser pointer here, start on the bottom here. This is a chrysalis on the leaf, and the adult butterfly emerges. It is benefiting off the nectar of this aster, and it is laying its eggs on the leaf. The larva eggs hatch, and the larvae feed on the plant material. And then all day long, birds are coming by and picking off these larvae, taking them to their nest. And they need these caterpillars to fledge their young out of the nest. So without native plants, you lose a lot of caterpillars, and therefore we're seeing a decline in bird populations. All right, so just a couple of questions. I usually have folks answer them, but since we're doing this as a webinar format, I'll just kind of give you a second to think about it. So what is Maine state bird? All right, black-capped chickadee. How many days are the young in the nest for? So when a black-capped chickadee lays its eggs, and the young hatch, how many days are those young in the nest? 16 days. How many caterpillars does it take during those 16 days to raise one clutch or one brood of young? So in 16 days, how many caterpillars do those parent chickadees need to go find? 6,000 to 9,000. Okay, so these chickadee parents need to find 500 caterpillars per day for 16 days in a row to properly get their young out of that nest. And that's just for one nest. So if you own a woodlot or acreage and you want a lot of birds, you need literally tens of thousands of caterpillars to have birds nest on your property. Okay, and that takes a lot of native plants. So as invasives are pushing out these natives, it really degrades this whole food web. Okay, and just put this here because you can kind of envision what a stand of knotweed would do, or a stand of honeysuckle and understory versus oak trees, which are really powerhouses as far as the amount of insects that an oak tree can support. I think an average invasive plant can maybe support 0 to 1 species of insect, or something like an oak tree can support roughly 500 to 700 different species of insects. All right, and it's not only the insects that are suffering as well. All these other animals, in some way, either benefit on native plants or insects. So insects are crucial food source for a lot of amphibians and birds and small mammals, which work their way up the food web into larger organisms as well. So just a couple kind of sources here from some articles. Caterpillars Sustain Food Webs by Talmy. If you haven't looked into Doug Talmy's work, he's amazing. And also, of all plant eaters, caterpillars transfer more energy from plants to other animals than any other organism. So just shows you how important caterpillars are in getting fats and protein, or getting energy from plants into animals, basically. All right, and it's really important right now, in a time of the insect apocalypse, so we're losing a third of our insect species. North America has lost 3 billion birds in the last 50 years in a 6 mass extinction. When you look at a lot of those animals that are endangered and that we're losing species, those different taxa are the ones that are utilizing native plants and insects. Okay, and they also physically damage wildlife habitat as well. So this is just a couple examples. We have a salt marsh here and a salt marsh sparrow nest, which are highly specialized for salt marsh grass habitat. And as phragmites are pushing out these salt marsh grasses, the insects that live in those habitats are getting pushed out as well. And then so are the salt marsh sparrows, which are critically endangered. And bittersweet climbing over the trees, kind of doing a number on the physical habitat and structural complexity of those trees. And it's not only terrestrial habitats, so I won't get too much into it, but this also impacts aquatic habitats as well. So here we have, starting on the left-hand side, when invasive plants are growing along, there are banks of streams and rivers and even lakes. We tend to have a lot more bare exposed mineral soil because of that high allelopathic chemical activity killing everything that's growing underneath them, and therefore less ground cover vegetation. So this leads to increased runoff, sedimentation, and erosion into our water bodies, increased embeddedness, which is really poor fish habitat and water quality issues and everything else. And also, we see bank stability issues, poor water quality, excess nutrients entering our waterways with that topsoil, and higher eutrophication events. Just a little bit about embeddedness. So it's basically the outcome of erosion. On the top there, we see really clean rock and cobble in that stream, and that's great trout habitat and aquatic insect habitat. So on the bottom there, below that, you see a stream that has received a lot of erosion, and that cobble is 99% embedded, you would call that. So basically a blanket of silt over that rock. So what that does, it really eliminates the young fish fry hiding places. So the young fish get into those crevices and cracks of those rocks and cobble and hide from predators. And also the premier food source for trout, stoneflies, mayflies, they will not grow. They will not live in any stream that has embeddedness. So they need very clean rock and cobble. And when we see invasive plants growing along streams and rivers, we see higher rates of embeddedness and erosion. We also see a lack of coarse wooded debris. So a lot of studies are showing a lack of woody organic material entering our streams. So we have less log jams and pools, therefore less refuge for stream fish, less opportunity for sediment to settle out, which happens when the velocity of the water slows down and hits a pool. All the sediment settles out, which is really important for water quality because we want that sediment to settle out. But with less pools, we have less settling and less organic material storage, less structural diversity and habitat complexity, less biodiversity, and reduced organic material. So less food resources, which is the base of the food web in these ecosystems. We're also seeing, again, just a function of less trees along these streams and rivers. We see more solar radiation entering our waterways. So greater water temperature, which is bad for organisms and bad for water quality. All right, so what can we do about invasive plants? Just some key steps into addressing invasive plants. We can prevent new invasions. So kind of learning to identify them, getting out and monitoring and surveying, early detection, rapid response, so finding them early and responding rapidly. Let's see, prioritizing control and monitoring, and again, repeating, pretty much rinse and repeat. All right, so we get a little bit into some identification of some common invasive plants in woodlots. The first one here is a severely invasive Asiatic bittersweet. Now this has simple alternate leaves. So when you think about leaf attachments, you either pretty much have opposite, which they're directly across from one another, or they're kind of staggered on the twig or stem, and that's alternate. So bittersweet has alternately attached leaves, and they're kind of wavier, crinkly when they get more mature. And they have weakly toothed edges, so very coarsely toothed leaves. If you were to hand pull one of these, they have orange roots. The flower clusters are along the whole leaf axils. So there actually is a native bittersweet, which is pretty uncommon. I'm sure for the most part, all the bittersweet that you're seeing is invasive. But with the native, the flower clusters and the fruits are only at the ends, the terminal ends of the twig, where the invasive bittersweet will have flowers and berries all up along that kind of whole section of twig towards the end. It flowers late in the growing season and produces the berries late in the fall and holds them all winter long. Another thing too, the native won't have those yellow capsules. The capsules on the native one is also the same color as the berry, kind of a reddish orange, where the invasive has the yellow capsules. These are bittersweet is dioecious, so only the females will produce fruit. So if you don't see fruits, it could certainly still be a bittersweet. The males actually do not produce fruit. It can sprout via root fragments and regenerate that way. And also it's a prolific stump sprouter as well. And seeds viable for a pretty short period of time, 1 to 2 years. So if you stay vigilant with this, you can wear out that seed bank fairly soon. Those leaves might not always look elliptical like the mature leaves. This is and the plant in general might not always look like a vine. They're very young and maybe they don't have anything to climb on. A lot of people will just mistake it as for a herbaceous plant or a small shrub. And the leaf shape can also be very variable as well. So if this plant is young or it's not getting a lot of light, it may have wider leaves or narrow leaves, as you can kind of see in this picture here. All right, I wasn't going to talk too much about management today, but I figured I would address this one because it's a bit tricky. But for managing bittersweet for medium to large plants, you're often cutting the vines and treating the regrowth. So small plants you could just hand pull, but for medium to large plants, you're cutting the vines and treating the regrowth. This is often called a window cut, and you'll have to monitor for sprouting. The vines can be left in the tree canopy to die. A lot of sources will recommend that people don't try to yank them down because that can cause damage to the trees and also cause injury to the person pulling as well if something was to come down. And cutting is not alone is not an effective means for management. Either you need to treat the resprouts or do a cut stump treatment. So cutting the vine and then doing an herbicide treatment on that cut stump, or letting it resprout and then treating the sprouts, whether that's mechanical removal, just cutting, or a foliar spray on that foliage. Just a little bit what the window cut looks like. So we have so we have the brown. We'll just say those are trees. So we want the trees, and the reddish stems are the vine climbing up the tree. So identify the bittersweet. Okay, and then you cut it, kind of removing a section. So kind of cutting it maybe about 6 inches above the ground up to about, maybe wherever you're comfortable cutting with the machinery you're using, but maybe 4 feet up above the ground there, removing a section, and then flagging that section above. And that will tell you where it's going to resprout. So the flagging really just allows you to really identify places that need to be monitored and then follow-up treatment on those resprouts. All right, the second one, common buckthorn. This is a perennial deciduous shrub or small tree. It can be one stem or multiple stems. It grew up to about 25 feet tall. Leaves are simple, subopposite, and tooth. So again, kind of more coarse tooth on these guys. And it does have, it's actually has this thorn in the middle here, and it's actually not a true thorn. It's more of the twig end that kind of died and kind of dies back and leaves that thorn attached, or that kind of resembles a thorn. It does have shiny gray bark, and it has these brown or light colored horizontal slash marks, or these lenticels on the bark. And it has an orange or yellowish inner bark if you were to scrape that off. Seeds are viable for 2 to 4 years. Spread primarily through birds and mammals. And the fruits are very showy, so they really attract birds. All right, and these are dioecious as well, so not all plants will have berries, and these are prolific stump sprouters as well. Common buckthorn does have a look-alike, but you won't really see it too often. It is an alder leaf buckthorn, so we have a buckthorn, a native buckthorn, but it's more of a wetland plant, pretty low-lying. It only gets about 2 or 3 feet tall, but it does have very similar leaves. So you can kind of see on the top right there the native and the invasive buckthorn leaves, but very different growth form. And I also put in here dogwood leaf as well. I personally think just the venation of the buckthorn leaf, how it kind of protrudes out from the main rib and then kind of goes towards the tip, is very similar to like a dogwood leaf. But just a big difference here, dogwood leaves are smooth or entire margins, so no teeth, and common buckthorn has teeth. All right, but there's also a glossy buckthorn. This one likes a little bit more moist conditions and is probably a bigger threat to forests in Maine here. Now, this one does have smooth margins, so entire margins. This one lacks the wooden thorn look. Leaves are alternate, glossy, and entire, so it does have a sheen to it. And that's why they call it glossy. The venations radiate outwards from the main vein, like all buckthorns. And this one, the fruits can actually be red or purple or black. Common will just be black or purple. Seeds are present and fruits midsummer and holds those berries throughout the winter, kind of further being distributed by birds throughout the winter season. And these will all have berries. And kind of putting that dogwood leaf in there as well. A bit different vein pattern with this one. It doesn't necessarily protrude out and go towards the tip as much as the common, but I still like to throw that in there. And what you can see in the bottom image there is just a bunch of glossy buckthorn seedlings. I see this all the time. This would be a great time to get out there in the spring and early summer and look for these seedlings, being able to identify all these plants in a young stage as well. Very common in forest habitat, seeing a lot of buckthorn regeneration. These shrubs can produce thousands of seeds, and birds are moving around pretty often. Norway maple. It's a large deciduous tree up to 60 feet tall. Leaves are opposite, 5-lobed with a very pointed tip. They often say that Norway maple leaves will be more wide than they are tall, so they have very wide leaf and very pointed tips on those five lobes. Norway maple has very furrowed bark. A lot of our natives will have more maple will have more of a shaggy bark, or not so furrowed as the Norway maple. Seeds germinate very quickly, high viability rates on these, and these samarises are quite large, so enables these winged seeds to travel further distances and invade more interior forests and get away from the parent plant easier. Norway maple turns yellow in the fall versus the native lookalike sugar maple, which is more of an orangish brown, where the Norway maple is more of a yellow. And there's also a Crimson King version, the red version of this tree as well. You see a lot of them along planted as street trees, but often they regenerate as the green form. All right, native lookalike sugar maple. So on the bottom left there, you'll see the two samarises. Sugar maple samarises are much smaller, and I'll often go down as a 90-degree angle, where the Norway maple has a broader, wide samaris that kind of goes out. Doesn't really turn. Doesn't have that doesn't point down. Norway maple will also produce white sap if you break off a petiole where it meets the twig. Not so much late in the fall when the tree is shutting down. You really have to squeeze it in late fall to really get that white sap. So it's often good to, when you're identifying a lot of these invasive plants, to really know 2 or 3 ways to identify it and make sure that you can kind of use multiple different methods to identify a plant. For example, if somebody was to snap off a leaf in the fall and they didn't see white sap and they're like, oh, it's not a Norway. But it certainly could be. The plant is just shutting down and not translocating as much in the fall. So let's see. Sugar maple has a very pointed bud, where Norway maple has a more blunt, rounded bud. Again, the samarises are quite a bit different. But yet it is tricky too, because if a Norway maple is getting a lot of sunlight, it'll actually produce 2 flushes of samaris. It'll produce thousands and thousands of small samarises early in the summer, and then drop them, and then start producing a second flush of samarises. And that first burst of samaris are much smaller than the late season samaris, so they could easily be mistaken as a sugar maple samaris. So again, important to kind of know 2 or 3 ways to identify these plants. Shrubby honeysuckles. So shrubby honeysuckle is kind of a silly name, but these plants actually hybridize. So that's why a lot of times you'll see them just lumped as shrub honeysuckles, shrubby honeysuckles. I tend to stay away from bush honeysuckle because that's actually there's a native to North America plant, bush honeysuckle. But shrubby honeysuckles, they hybridize. Most of them are Marrow's honeysuckle, but we also have Tatarian honeysuckle, but they're hybridizing to form the hybrid bella, they call that. And it gets tricky because you can also have intermediate conditions, intermediate traits. But all the honeysuckles have very opposite leaves, entire, so no teeth. And some of them, I would say about 50% of them will have a pubescent underside. So it almost feels like peach fuzz on the bottom, on the underside of that leaf. Flowers are tubular at the leaf axis, very, very indicative of our honeysuckles. And the large twigs will have a hollow pith. So this is kind of a surefire way to know if you have an invasive. Is all the invasives will have a hollow pith, and all the natives will have a solid pith. But the kicker here is that the first year growth will not have a hollow pith yet. It has to be second year or older. So if you were to kind of just grab some low-hanging fruit or a low-hanging stem, to be more specific, and cut this twig, that young branch there would have a solid pith. So you have to go to at least a second year twig, and they'll always have a hollow pith on the invasives. And they can have red or orange berries. So again, kind of getting into that hybrid traits, they may or may not have pubescent leaves, and they may have orange or they may have red berries. But the big thing here is that all of them will have twin berries, so kind of double berries, and they'll be completely round, where our natives will have oblong berries. So we do have a couple native honeysuckles. They're not nearly as common as the invasives, but you will see them. They're much smaller in size. They don't look nearly as shaggy and just kind of gnarly. They just kind of look like a nice little 2 or 3 stemmed twig, woody plant that maybe gets 2 or 3 feet tall. All the natives will have a solid pith, and they have oblong fruit. So they may be twin berries, they may be twin red berries, but they're more oblong and not completely round. Our natives, so we have the fly honeysuckle and the mountain honeysuckle. They will not have pubescent undersides, but they will have hairs along the leaf margin. But they're pretty small. For some, it may take like a 10x little hand lens to see that. But if you have good eyesight, you'll see some hairs along the leaf margin. All right, lesser celandines, or Ficaria verna. This one isn't very common, but I put it in here because it's a real pesky plant and causing a lot of problems for woodlots in southeast and central eastern United States. And it is here in Maine too. It's probably been here for the last maybe 10, 15 years, and it is starting to kind of ramp up its population a bit. So it's a good one to watch out for because it can really do number on the forest understory. And it's a severe spring ephemeral. So this plant will be it'll be present as soon as that snow melts, and it'll die completely back by June, just leaving behind a pile of these tubers and bulbils that will get spread by heavy rain events and wildlife and ATVs and things like that. So what we have here is we have below ground tubers and above ground bulblets, they call them, or bulbils, but they're all basically bulbs. And you'll see that all over the plant. It has 8 to 11 petals and 3 sepals. I believe it's the only wildflower in Maine that'll have 3 yellow 8 and 11 petals and 3 sepals underneath. And it's a very vibrant yellow. And again, it'll flower very early. All right. So what is early detection rapid response? This is a typical invasion curve. Early detection rapid response is a strategy to help combat new invasive species from becoming widespread and eliminate them to prevent further spread and hopefully eradicate them. What we see here on the x-axis is time. On the y-axis, we have area infested and control costs. So as time continues, area infested increases exponentially and control costs go up as well. So where we really want to be is in this prevention stage, so monitoring and looking out for introductions, and then responding rapidly and working towards eradication. Okay, so just to give you this, you can really take this approach on many different scales, or you can think about it like a certain species to your property, or certain species for the whole state of Maine, or you can think about more widespread species that are new to your area. And a couple of different species that we're dealing with in Maine that are threats to woodlots that are early detection rapid response species. The first one is Japanese silkgrass, and this one is been a thorn in my side since I've been in this position. It's moving pretty rapidly, and it's very shade tolerant, and it's invading a lot of woodlots through ATV activities and a lot of kind of old abandoned or just kind of old harvests that's growing. A lot of land trusts are finding it growing along skid trails of recently harvested lands that they're acquiring, and they acquire the lands and they're realizing that they're riddled with stiltgrass. This plant was first documented in Maine in 2020 in York and in Georgetown, Maine. It's an annual grass, often 1 to 3 feet tall. Has these stilted roots. The lower nodes of the plant can produce roots that will eventually make it to the soil and almost lift that plant up a little bit, giving it a stilt-like effect, and that's where it gets its namesake from. It has very pale, soft, delicate-looking leaves, pale green, that are a 1/2 inch wide, 2 to 4 inches long, and have this indicative silver stripe down the midrib. If you were to look at that underneath the scope, that's actually a lot of fine silver hairs. And the closest native look-like we would have is a Virginia cutgrass, but has this hairy ring around the node and some fine hairs along the stem, like stiltgrass has, if you can see that. But stiltgrass does not have this very dense, hairy node. And native lookalikes will also have more than 3 flower stalks and no silver midrib. And this plant is very highly allelopathic. It's probably the most highly allelopathic plant we have in Maine, except maybe tree of heaven. But this plant is more of a threat of tree of heaven for forests because it can invade closed canopy forests. Like I had said, it's in Georgetown, York, and Sanford, Springvale. I believe there's quite a bit more of it than we know about. So this is definitely a plant to be on the lookout for, and if you see it, definitely report it. Next one is mile-a-minute vine. This is an alternate triangular leafed aggressive vine. The leaves are 1 to 3 inches long and very triangular in shape. Has these round ochrea where the petiole meets the stem. Will have these modified leaves. It's basically a leaf material that's completely round, and these hooked barbs up and down the stem. We do have a native persicaria and native tear thumb, but it will not have these ochrea. And we also have some native and non-native bindweeds. A lot of people will actually report and think it's mile-a-minute vine, but a lot of times it's bindweed. Again, will not have triangular shaped leaves. Bindweed does not have thorns and does not have ochrea as well. And this one for the moment is just a nursery stock hitchhiker. It's been found in Topsham, Boothbay Harbor, Islesboro, and Winthrop. And this is just basically where somebody will buy a plant from the garden center, plant it in their yard, and then later on in that season, they'll have this vine growing over their new plant. So basically, they're bringing home a pot with the seeds of mile-a-minute vine that will then a couple months later germinate and grow. And then they notice it and they'll call it in, and we'll go out there and hand pull it. And for now, mile-a-minute vine has been intercepted. So there's no naturally occurring mile-minute vine in Maine. But if you do see this one, it's very important to report that to DSF Horticulture or myself at the Maine Natural Areas Program. All right, we're going to move into IMAP invasives. Okay, so again, kind of thinking about reporting it. This is a great way to do so through IMAP invasives. Hopefully you've heard about it before, but if not, we'll just go over it very quickly. Basically, IMAP invasives is a central repository for invasive plant data in Maine. So DACF actually pays for us to be a part of the IMAP invasives program and for accounts to be free. So accounts are free, and it's a great place to document invasive plants, map invasive plants in your property and woodlots, and you can also track a lot of treatment data in there as well over time. Who is IMAP invasives for? It's really for anybody. So again, free for the people in Maine, for citizen scientists, land managers, foresters, anybody just outside experiencing and documenting the natural world. So accounts are free. Just go to imapinvasives.org. And the first step is to click on that login button, and then it'll prompt you to sign up. And then just make sure you check your email. So it'll send you a confirmation in your email. So once you confirm in your email, your account is active. And there's also some great mobile apps as well. So also go to your app store and download the mobile app. Just a little bit about IMAP invasives. There's a couple different ways to use it. There's I guess I'm going to start on the right side, the browser version, the browser interface. You do need connectivity for that. And you can also use the browser interface on your smartphone device if you have connectivity. But what's nice about the mobile apps is you do not need to have connectivity. So you can be in the backcountry, you can be on a hike without service, and you can still map invasive plants. And once you get back into service range, you sync it up and everything will go to the cloud and sync up into IMAP. Just a little bit about the different mobile apps. Let's see here. So this is the browser version, IMAP Online. And as you can see, the functionality of this, you can create records, you can track treatment data, you can create lines and polygons. But what you see here is under the mobile app, it has some deficiencies. So you cannot enter treatment data in the IMAP mobile app, and you cannot create lines and polygons. So all you can really do is just drop points and then assign them a species on the map. Okay, but IMAP invasives just came out with a more complex mobile app, where, as you can see here, it has all the functionality of the desktop plus more. And this is the IMAP Survey 123 app. Okay, so if you want just something very easy to drop points and map the distribution of invasive plants, maybe the IMAP mobile app will do it. If not, there's also an IMAP Survey 123 app that has a lot more functionality, just as many, if not more, than the desktop version. And if you want more assistance with IMAP or more questions, definitely feel free to reach out to me and I can help you get set up. A little bit about what the desktop looks like. So when you go into imapinvasives.org on the desktop browser and log in, we see on the left-hand side, we have navigation tools, the main menu, action tools, geographic layers. I'm not going to get too into this for kind of time's sake, but again, there's a lot of great resources I'll set you guys up with. If you have any questions, you can also contact me, and maybe in the future we can also even do an IMAP invasives workshop. But if you do go over to the action tools under filter records, you can filter a lot of different great criteria to kind of hone in on your search or just kind of try to figure out what you're looking for. But the first thing that I recommend is to go under jurisdiction and just turn on Maine. Otherwise, it's going to be queuing up all the data from the country, and it's going to take a lot more time to load everything up for you. So just select Maine as the jurisdiction, and things will work a lot faster for you. And good pictures are essential. So if you do create records, they all have to be confirmed by myself or my interns. And we can only do that if the pictures are good and detailed. Unfortunately, if the picture is not very focused or far away, we cannot confirm it, and therefore it just kind of stays in an unconfirmed status, which it's still okay to see on the map, but it's better to if they are confirmed. They're kind of weighted differently. Okay, so nice close up, fill that frame of plant parts that we can definitely, without a doubt, say that it is what you say it is. There's a ton of great resources out there. So IMAP Invasives Network online, imapinvasives.org under the Help and Resources tab. IMAP Invasives, there's a user manual. There's also a lot of really great YouTube tutorials. So New York has done a lot, has pretty much created this program and is doing pretty much most of the hosting now. But they have a lot of great YouTube videos. I think they have a whole channel dedicated to functionality on IMAP Invasives. So those are really great. Check those out. All right, moving on to a little bit about prioritizing management.
I don't mean to interrupt, Chad, but I wondered for people who need to go, because we're after 5:30, I wonder if we could get some questions in before they have to go. So does anybody have any questions for Chad about your particular situation or anything he has presented? Go ahead and unmute or turn on your video or type it in the chat. Looks like don't have questions right now. So, all right. Continue on there.
Yeah, well, feel free to stop me anytime. Just a couple more slides left, actually. Prioritizing management. So I see all the time where people will kind of start on the main core infestation and get kind of wore out and frustrated that they're not making it's not as impactful as they would like, and then they kind of give up or they think it's kind of a dead end. But control work should really begin on the lightest areas of infestation or the smallest areas first, and working towards the core. And that really prohibits those small infestations from becoming unmanageable. And is definitely just an easier way to go. This is just another way to look at that. So again, kind of on the left there, you would obviously remove A before you would tackle B. So start with small infestations first, and also work upstream and work downstream when you are moving invasive plants along a stream or a river. And different ways to prioritize. There's either a plant species basis, so you maybe want to manage plants that are new to the property or new to your area, or maybe they're localized versus widespread. So you remove something like a stilt grass versus something like honeysuckle, and also they may have unacceptable impacts, like knotweed, for example, or high dispersal rates. You may want to target plants that have longer seed longevity. So again, multiflora rows. Those seeds are viable in the soil for up to 20 years. You may want to remove multiflora rows and then work towards the ones that are a bit less under or have higher dispersal rates and regeneration rates. Or the site basis. So you may want to do manage outliers first, protect priority habitats. Again, start upstream. Manage areas that are soon to be harvested. So kind of doing a pre and post harvest invasive plant inventory and management. And also removing plants that are in high dispersal areas. So whether that's roadsides, skid trails, ATV trails, things like that. Just a bit about early detection rapid response. Again, kind of removing those plants before they're causing a problem. Removing that Japanese knotweed, for example, when it's just that single stem before letting it 20 years later taking over the whole bank. And nipping it in the bud. As they say, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of the cure. Protecting rare habitats. So beginning with habitat has some great resources that will show you riparian areas, rare plant and animal habitats that's derived from UNEP data. Just has a lot about kind of more special places that you may want to protect and set specific goals. So eradication is not only the goal, you may need to, that may not even be possible. So you may just need to contain or exclude or suppress, even cutting the above ground biomass so it can't produce seed. So just a couple of examples of that: reducing the extent, decreasing density, preventing seed production, maybe keep vines from killing trees, and maintaining access to infrastructure, or knocking these plants back off of roads so they're not spreading and dispersing. And these are not mutually exclusive, so goals may change over time. That's pretty much it. I just have some screenshots here of some resources. On the top left there, we have the Maine Natural Areas Program, Invasive Plants tab. There's a lot of great resources there. That's where you can go to get set up with IMAP invasives. We have a free PDF version of the invasive plant field guide, and just a lot of great resources for invasive plants here. On the Maine Forest Service website, they also have an invasive plant tab. This is kind of on hold now. The invasive plant management program that offered funding for more of a cost share program for working woodlots, anything over 10 acres. But funding, unfortunately, for that now is kind of put on hold. But I would keep your eyes on this website if that was something that would interest you. Also, the NRCS has some great programs. So technically, you have to be a farm or a commodity producer, but they're pretty loose on that definition. And if you can kind of check off multiple boxes as far as like you have a woodlot, you grow your own produce, maybe you have some good wildlife habitat you want to protect, maybe you have a stream and you're protecting water quality. The more of those boxes you can check off, the better. So they really encourage people just to go in there and apply, even if you think it could potentially be a fit.
And actually, I'll jump in real quick. We have a cost share, NRCS cost share forestry coordinator in our office, Olivia Larson. And so calling our office, asking any questions about these cost share programs, we have someone who can help you with that.
All right, a couple more websites, kind of who can do the work. On the Maine Natural Areas Program website, again, the Invasives tab, there is a form here, non-herbicide or herbicide invasive plant control experts and businesses. Same thing with the DACF Horticulture Got Pests website. And I also put another screenshot from the Maine Forest Service. They have a list of eligible invasive plant control practice plan preparers. So basically contractors that are doing invasive plant work, if you do get funding from them under this program, you need to basically hire one of these folks here. Just some revegetation resources. Whenever you're moving a lot of invasive plants, you should often think about revegetating the site. Just a couple of sources here. Native Plant Trust has a lot of great resources to find out what plants will fit in your habitat and grow in that site. Here's another Native Plant Finders, pretty similar. There's also a wild seed project that has a lot of great seeds. And I like this one here too. It's a New England roadside matrix wet meadow seed. And what I like about this is it actually has a lot of native grasses, wildflowers, and shrubs. So kind of are filling different kind of functional, it has a lot of functional diversity and filling a lot of that different niche space, which is really important to increase the biotic resistance to fend off invasive plants. Okay, the Invasive Plant Academy, the Invasive Plant Field Guide that I'd mentioned, that's a great resource. Talks about categorizing different plants by growth form, how to identify them, talks about their description and ecology, native lookalikes, control methods, dispersal, disposal, and more. You can get that on the Maine Woodland Owners.org web store or the Maine Natural Areas Program website. I actually think might be slightly cheaper through the Maine Woodland owners because it includes taxes and shipping and all that. So that's a great resource. And also Seek by iNaturalist is a great mobile app to point it at a plant and it can identify it for you. It's not always 100% accurate, but it's pretty good. Native Plant Trust Go Botany website is great for Maine plants and iNaturalist as well. And that's it.
So much information. Thank you so much. And
You're welcome.
we could do a whole program just on the apps and the resources that are available for identification and for management of invasive plants. So, and I
Yes.
think we might do that as well. It's just a big topic. There's been some questions on the chat. One was, did you discuss multiflora rose and autumn olive? For someone who wasn't here at the beginning.
No, I did not.
Okay, so they're pretty common. That's what a lot of people are finding in their properties. And they can absolutely get out of control. Someone asked if we were going to post this recording. Yes, you will find this. Give me a few days. I'll have it up on the mainwoodlandowners.org/videos page where we have all our videos. We also have a YouTube channel. It will be on there as well. Maine Woodland Owners YouTube. And barberry and this one participant said that barberry is the worst invasive in Georgetown by far. And I encourage you to reach out to anybody here who's listening, should be in touch with Chad. He's very accessible, he's very knowledgeable, and he can give you some, there's way more things to learn from him. Does anybody jump in with questions? Go ahead, Chad. Sorry.
Well, I just want to say something, we wanted to focus this talk more on the impacts, to try to get people kind of involved and excited. But I mean, if you would like to talk in the future about more management too, then that's something we can explore as well.
Great. Anybody want to jump in with a question?
I have a question.
Go for it.
Thank you for putting this on. It's awesome. I think you may have answered my question with that field guide, but it has to do with how do you dispose of what you remove? For example, let's say you've cut a bunch of bittersweet. What do you do with it?
Well, it all depends what species, but a lot of the woody plants, you can actually leave them right on site. So, even when you're managing and we're thinking about what to do with them, it's important to think about how the plant reproduces. Can it sprout by above ground growth, basically? And a lot of the woody plants cannot. So if it does not have seeds or berries on it, you can just leave it. A lot of times, if you're hand pulling and it has the roots attached, you can actually just kind of hang it roots up in the crotch of a tree or something. As long as the roots are not contacting that soil, it'll just desiccate up there. But if you were to, for example, like honeysuckle, if you were to just whack it all down, you could just pile it up and leave it. Or you can even scatter it, as long as it doesn't have seed or roots.
Thank you.
Yeah.
How do you control garlic mustard? Bruce Cushing's question.
That's a great one for hand pulling. Definitely hand pull is very easy. You just have to kind of, again, be careful. It doesn't have seeds because they produce a lot of seeds and they're tiny. And a lot of times if you're hand pulling and it does have seeds, you're going to send those seeds flying everywhere. So once it kind of produces seed, you kind of just leave it alone and maybe get it next year. But that's a great one to hand pull, kind of like ornamental jewelweed. It comes right up. And then it's just a matter of wearing out that seed bed.
What about Roundup? What's your feeling about that?
It's definitely, that's a glyphosate product, so it's very effective. It's a very effective. It's a systemic, so basically you don't need a lot of it. It's not a contact killer, so it's a systemic. So it actually takes the chemical into the plant material and delivers it to the root system. So you actually only need to cover about 30% of the plant. So you don't need to put a ton of it down. And so if it's a large patch that's beyond hand pulling, it can definitely be effective.
We have had actually a lot of articles in our newsletter talking about glyphosate and how to apply it for those who are interested in that. A lot of it's been on beech. We have a columnist in our newsletter who's very, he's not at war, but he's really aggressive about managing beech because of the disease he's finding in his forests. If there's no one else with questions at this time, then I will thank Chad for your time and your information presentation. And thank everybody for attending. It's great to have you here. We had a great turnout. I know it's a topic of deep interest. Again, we'll try to offer more as the year continues. And as we get into the thick of forest management when things start growing back. And get into our woods a little bit more. I hope you have a great night, and I look forward to seeing you again. Check our events page, mainwoodlandowners.org/events, and you'll see what else we have coming up in March. I just sent out an email with a list of our programs. I hope to see you at those as well. So thank you very much and have a great night.